Stop. Before you react, before you comment, before you defend, before you accuse this video of bias, answer this. If a man in his 50s today asked to marry your 6-year-old, how would you respond? He says he will consummate the marriage when she is 9. Would you call that normal? Would you call it moral? Would you say that was acceptable? Or would you demand prison? Now remove religion, remove prophecy, remove sacred titles. Just the act. Does your standard change, or does it stay the same? If it were a priest, a pastor, a politician, would you hesitate, or would you use the strongest language available? So what is happening here? Are your morals consistent, or are they conditional? Is your standard ethical or tribal? Here is the harder question. If you are willing to redefine Jesus across 6 centuries, if you are willing to ignore historical context to make him fit your theology, why does context suddenly become sacred when it protects your own profit? Why is history flexible in one direction and untouchable in the other? You cannot suspend context selectively. You cannot rewrite one figure and shield another. So answer honestly. If this happened today, would you defend it? Or does your defense depend entirely on who the man was? That answer reveals everything. Across modern religious debates, a pattern keeps appearing. Redefinition. Historical figures are lifted out of their own time and relabeled using later categories. Jesus is called a Muslim. Abraham is called a Muslim. Moses is called a Muslim. The reasoning sounds simple. Islam means submission. They submitted to God. Therefore, they were Muslims. But that move changes the rules of history. It projects a 7th century religious identity onto 1st century and even earlier figures. It overrides chronology. It overrides language. It overrides context. And once you allow that move, you cannot control where it stops. Because if later categories can be projected backward onto earlier figures, then modern legal categories can also be projected backward onto historical acts. You cannot authorize one direction and forbid the other. Either context governs history, or it does not. Islamic apologetics often argue that Islam is not merely a religion founded in the 7th century, but the eternal religion of submission to God. Under that framework, anyone who submitted to God before Muhammad can be labeled Muslim, including Jesus. But historically, Jesus lived in 1st century Judea. He spoke Aramaic. He read the Hebrew scriptures. He worshipped in the Jerusalem temple. Islam is a structured religion with Quran, Hadith, and Sharia. Did not yet exist, yet he is reclassified. Chronology is set aside. History is retrofitted. This is the rule being used, so now we apply it consistently. If redefining Jesus across 6 centuries is legitimate, then redefining Islamic history using modern legal classifications must also be legitimate. So we examine the primary texts, Sahih al-Bukhari, Hadith 5134. Aisha is reported as saying, "The Prophet married me when I was 6 years old and consummated the marriage when I was 9. 6 at marriage, 9 at consummation." Sahih Muslim, Hadith 1422b, records the same age structure. These are not marginal texts. In Sunni Islam, Bukhari and Muslim are considered the most authentic collections after the Quran. The wording is explicit. There is no ambiguity in the numbers. 6, 9. Now consider another narration. Sahih al-Bukhari, Hadith 6130. Aisha reports that she used to play with dolls in the Prophet's house. The classical commentary in Fath al-Bari, attributed to Ibn Hajar, explains, the playing with dolls was permitted for Aisha because she had not yet reached puberty. That point matters because it links the doll's narration directly to prepubescence. So the internal record includes explicit numerical ages and classical commentary indicating she had not yet reached puberty. That is not an external accusation. It is internal Sunni scholarship. For over 1,000 years, these narrations were accepted. Ibn Kathir recorded the age plainly. Al-Tabari recorded it. Ibn Hajar affirmed its authenticity. Imam Nawawi affirmed it in commentary on Sahih Muslim. There was no sustained classical rejection. The controversy is modern, the texts are not. In recent decades, a minority of contemporary researchers have proposed alternative chronologies. They argue that Aisha may have been older, most commonly between 15 and 19 at the time of consummation. These arguments rely on recalculations involving her sister Asma's age, participation timelines in battles such as Badr and Uhud, claims of inconsistencies in hadith transmission, or suggestions of later numerical miscalculation. However, these reconstructions remain minority views. They have not displaced the long-standing classical consensus. The dominant position across centuries accepted the younger age reports as historically reliable. The historical record is clear. Now comes the question of classification. Under modern international standards, including those used by the United Nations, UNICEF, and the World Health Organization, any marriage in which one party is under 18 years of age is classified as child marriage. By that definition alone, a contract at 6, consummation at 9, meets that classification. In most contemporary legal systems worldwide, sexual relations with a child below early adolescence are prohibited by law. Marriage does not override those prohibitions in most jurisdictions. A 9-year-old falls significantly below modern age of consent thresholds. The terminology becomes unavoidable when modern definitions are applied. Modern psychiatric manuals, including the DSM-5 text revision and the ICD-11, define a category of behavior involving sexual activity with a prepubescent child, generally 13 years or younger, where the individual is at least 5 years older than the child. The Hadith literature describes Aisha as not yet having reached puberty at the time of consummation. One narration states, "I had not yet menstruated." If one accepts the reported age of 9 and a partner in his 50s, then under present clinical frameworks, the behavior described aligns with the criteria for pedophilic conduct. This is not rhetorical exaggeration, it is definitional alignment. 7th century Arabia did not operate under 21st century legal standards. Early marriage practices existed across numerous ancient cultures, Jewish communities, Persian societies, Arab tribes. Social norms were different, legal systems were different, life expectancy was different. But when modern language is applied to evaluate historical figures, consistency demands that the same framework be applied uniformly. History must be read honestly. Definitions must be applied consistently. The dominant classical Islamic sources report a marriage contract at 6, consummation at 9, an age difference exceeding 40 years. Under today's legal definitions, that qualifies as child marriage. Under contemporary legal systems, it would fall under sexual exploitation of a minor. Under modern clinical terminology, it meets the diagnostic threshold for pedophilic behavior. These are not insults, they are classifications. History provides the data, modern systems provide the terminology, the interpretation rests with the listener. Now widen the lens. In Roman and Byzantine law, the legal minimum marriage age for girls was 12. 12 was tied to puberty. Marriage below that age was not legally valid under Roman civil law. In rabbinic Jewish law, legal majority for girls was generally recognized around 12 years and 1 day. That does not mean early betrothal never happened, but the recognized threshold clustered around puberty, not single digits. So the claim that this was universal everywhere is historically inaccurate. Arabia operated tribally, but it was not identical to Roman legal structures. That distinction matters. Now apply the consistency test. Under modern international legal standards, marriage to a 6-year-old is classified as child marriage. Sexual relations with a 9-year-old are classified as statutory rape in most jurisdictions. These are legal definitions, not insults. If modern theological categories can redefine Jesus across centuries, then modern legal categories can classify historical acts. The rule must be symmetrical. The common defense is this: it was normal for the time. That argument introduces a principle: context matters. If context matters for 7th century Arabia, then context must also matter for 1st century Judea. Jesus cannot be removed from his Jewish context, while Muhammad is protected within his Arabian context. You cannot suspend context in one direction and invoke it in the other. You must choose one rule. Either context governs historical identity, or it does not. This discussion is not abstract. Child marriage remains legal or partially legal in some jurisdictions influenced by religious jurisprudence. Historical precedent is sometimes cited in legal debate. When historical acts are treated as normative, they influence policy. So the issue is not emotional outrage, it is methodological consistency. Notice the asymmetry. Jesus is redefined against historical context. Muhammad is defended by appealing to historical context. One figure is retroactively relabeled. The other is insulated. That is not neutral methodology. That is selective application. So here is the crossroads. Does context govern historical interpretation? If yes, then Jesus remains a first-century Jewish Messiah, not a 7th-century Muslim. If no, then modern legal definitions apply retroactively to all historical figures, including Muhammad. Redefinition cuts both ways. Either context matters or it does not, and whichever rule is chosen must apply universally. Before you go, like this video and subscribe to the channel. We love that you're here. You are family. Before you go, like this video and subscribe to the channel. We love that you're here. You are family.